Refusing Jade's chart was the smartest decision I could have made, as diving into her dark affairs promised nothing good. Instead, I tightly pressed the blue folder for room 906 to my chest, bearing the name of William Schoenfeld, the very patient who had voluntarily surrendered to doctors after months of unbearable voices commanding him to kill. My hidden, selfish motivation guided me forward. It was vital for me to see real, documented insanity to finally satisfy myself of my own normalcy. However, when I crossed the threshold of room 906, my expectedly grim projections shattered against reality. 29-year-old Will looked completely normal, even attractive. A tidy, clean t-shirt, jeans, neatly trimmed dark hair, light stubble, and intellectual wire-rimmed glasses. He sat calmly on the bed, absorbed in reading a book, and only raised his eyes to me with a slight caution and distinct mistrust when I introduced myself as a medical student. When I carefully asked him about the nature of those horrific voices, Will confirmed absolutely evenly that they did indeed demand violence from him, like pushing a random pedestrian right under the wheels of a car. Yet, he immediately assured me that thanks to the prescribed medications in Ward D, silence had finally reigned in his head, even though, judging by the chart, he had been taking the medicine for only a few days. We got to talking about mundane topics. Will mentioned that he lived completely alone and didn't have a girlfriend, adding with a bitter smile that now was clearly not the ideal time for a romantic relationship. At that moment, I noticed a neat stack of John Irving books on his dresser. Our conversation suddenly came alive when we started discussing his novel, A Prayer for Owen Meany, and a genuine, warm smile appeared on my companion's face for the first time. But the moment I asked a simple question about his profession, Will instantly shut down. His gaze turned cold, and his voice grew far too flat as he dryly cut me off, saying he worked as a regular Uber driver. This sudden shift caused my internal voice to sound the alarm. The patient continued to maintain a far too direct, unblinking eye contact, which was entirely atypical for classic schizophrenia. A sticky suspicion grew inside me that this guy was shamelessly lying to me, because a person who came to be treated voluntarily had no reason to hide the truth. The moment I left Will's room and headed down the hallway, the space reminded me of its presence once again. Passing by Seclusion Room 1, where Damon Sawyer was locked away, I jumped from a sudden, terrifying slam from the inside. The metal door panel vibrated painfully, followed by a hollow, inhuman growl. The patient was throwing his entire body against the barrier, trying to break it down. Terrified, I backed away to the opposite wall, breathing heavily. At that exact second, the door to the neighboring room, 905, creaked open again, and Jade appeared on the threshold. She was wearing pink sweatpants and a tank top that clearly revealed she wasn't wearing a bra, while her face was smeared with old makeup like dirty stains. She contemptuously scanned my frightened look and spitefully muttered that I looked utterly pathetic. Her words instantly ignited our old conflict. With all her accumulated rage, Jade accused me of cold-bloodedly ruining her life 8 years ago, just to secure a flawless reputation for admission to medical college. My quiet, apologetic words drowned in her scorn. She bitterly reminded me that I hadn't even bothered to come to her mother's funeral, and then added that although she hadn't read her own medical chart, she had clearly seen how I was just twisting myself inside out in front of that Will guy. With a disgusting, manipulative smile, Jade called him a cute nerd and directly advised me to sleep with him to take the edge off. When I indignantly reminded her that this man suffered from severe schizophrenia, Jade just laughed out loud, remarking that in that case, he and I had far too much in common. This subtle, poisonous allusion to my teenage hallucinations instantly pulled the rug out from under my feet, leaving my heart pounding in my throat. Trying to escape her taunting, I hurried to Dr. Beck and anxiously reported that Sawyer was throwing himself against the walls in Seclusion 1 and had most likely managed to break completely free from his restraint straps. The doctor frowned for a moment, but immediately reassured me, promising that the thick metal was securely locked. To distract me, he sent me to the patient day room, which smelled of fresh, still tacky paint. Cameron had already settled in there, having managed to drag Daniel Ludwig, our Spider Dan, in for an interview. The patient, with a massive double chin and thinning brown hair, sat in his dirty superhero t-shirt, intently studying his own wrists. In a monotonic wooden voice, he stubbornly insisted to Cameron that a real, strong web was growing right beneath his skin, and he was simply obligated to let it out. My ex decided to play along with the madness and asked Daniel ironically whether his archenemy, the Green Goblin, was trying to get to him tonight. The patient fell into a long silence, seriously weighing every word before quietly denying it. But his next words made me freeze. Dan stated completely calmly that his internal spider sense whispered an entirely different name, Damon Sawyer. His monotonic voice, devoid of any emotion, clearly articulated that Sawyer was going to brutally murder every single one of us before morning because he had personally told him about the plan. When the interview ended and Daniel left, Cameron suddenly pulled out a box of my favorite ring dings, awkwardly trying to mend fences and make up for his past guilt. I resolutely refused his offering, feeling nothing but a dull irritation. Our tense silence was broken by Will Schoenfeld, who quietly stepped into the room, sat down at the old piano in the corner, and began to play a complex Mozart melody with astonishing precision. Cameron just gave a spiteful scoff and left us alone in annoyance. The moment the door shut behind my ex, the music cut off. Will turned to me, and all his previous restraint vanished. Glancing back at the door, he confessed quietly that he had also clearly heard Damon Sawyer screaming from his seclusion room about his intention to slaughter the entire ward. But Will saved the most terrifying part for last. He shared that when he had stepped out into the hallway a few minutes ago, it looked to him as if the heavy door to Seclusion 1 was closing from the outside. And that meant only one thing. The dangerous psychopath might have somehow gotten out of his cage. With each passing minute, Ward D felt more and more like a closed mousetrap. Trying to clear my head, I returned to the staff break room, but before I could even sit down, the massive figure of Miguel appeared in the doorway. Broad, uneven white streaks stood out on his cheeks. At first, I thought in terror that it was some kind of tribal war paint, but looking closer, I recognized regular cream cheese with disgust. Miguel was breathing heavily, and with his thick Spanish accent, began aggressively demanding the 6-digit door code from me. He frantically repeated that his father god demanded by morning it would be too late. Damon Sawyer was already loose and was going to unleash a bloodbath. "Here, Morto," the giant repeated, staring at me with blank eyes. "Morto." And at the exact second of his words, the space shuddered again from another hollow, vibrating impact from the direction of the first seclusion room. Pure panic seized me. Leaving Miguel, I bolted like a bullet down the empty, dim hallway straight to the resident physician's office. Dr. Beck opened the door for me, looking slightly drowsy and relaxed. At my frantic explanations, he only smiled tiredly, noting that Miguel didn't know the digits anyway and wouldn't escape anywhere, and Mr. Sawyer was securely fastened to the bed with straps, so there was absolutely no reason for my hysteria. His calm tone lowered the temperature of my terror a bit, But staying in the hallway was frightening. Wanting to find a safe haven, I returned to the nursing station and decided to take the medical chart of the most harmless patient, 78-year-old Mary Cummings. However, opening the first page of her blue folder, I felt my fingers grow cold. The old woman had ended up here after pushing a neighbor's child off a high swing with savage cruelty simply because the metallic squeaking irritated her to no end. When I entered room 912, Mary was still monotonically clicking her needles, growing her endless scarf. Seeing me, she smiled pleasantly but immediately called me by the name of someone named Nicole. I hurriedly corrected her, calling myself Amy, to which the old woman only gave a sly squint. She suddenly brought up her late husband, Harvey, remarking that exactly 10 years ago he had very fortunately fallen down the stairs and broken his neck. There was so much hidden satisfaction in her voice that the puzzle instantly came together in my head. It was a pure, premeditated murder. Mary suddenly laughed quietly, hoarsely, and confessed that all this endless knitting wasn't for pleasure at all. With those words, she plunged her hand into her deep bag and pulled out an extra long steel knitting needle with a sharp point. Insistently forcing this cold metal into my palm, she whispered that this thing would be vitally necessary for me when Damon Sawyer came to kill me. I felt the metal burn my skin and obediently hid this improvised weapon in the deep pocket of my scrubs, not having the slightest clue how prophetic the crazy old woman's words would turn out to be. The night dragged on endlessly. I tossed and turned for a long time on the old, sagging couch in the staff break room, but sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts raced chaotically, and to somehow soothe my nerves, I decided to go to Will's room and borrow one of his John Irving books. Room 906 greeted me with semi-darkness and a half-open door. Will himself wasn't inside. The distinct sound of running water came from behind the closed bathroom door. I quietly walked over to the dresser where the familiar stack lay and randomly pulled out the heavy volume of The World According to Garp. When I opened the cover, my heart skipped a beat. The book was dead. All its internal pages had been neatly cut out, forming a deep, rectangular hidden compartment. And at the very bottom of this paper vault lay more than a dozen multicolored pills. I didn't need to think twice. I instantly recognized them as the exact heavy antipsychotic medications Nurse Ramona handed out to patients with such satisfaction. The entire time, Will had just been fooling me. He hadn't taken a single dose of his medicine. His illness was completely unchecked, and he himself, with his voices commanding him to kill, posed a deadly threat right now. Suddenly, the sound of water in the bathroom stopped. Realizing he was about to come out, I frantically closed the fake book and returned it to the dresser. Will appeared on the threshold, wiping his face, and his intense gaze instantly locked onto the stack of literature. I tried to steady my breathing, pretending with the last of my strength that I was simply looking for something to read, and asked him for the novel The Cider House Rules. He looked straight into my eyes intensely for far too long before slowly pulling out the requested volume. But from his tense posture, I clearly understood he guessed that his secret was out. The moment I managed to leave the room, I ran to Dr. Beck and laid out everything about the hidden stash I had found. The doctor only sighed tiredly and dryly remarked that at the slightest hint of trouble, we would simply switch to forced intramuscular injections, which would quickly tame the defiant patient. But this anxious space of Ward D continued to relentlessly drag my own past to the surface, triggering a chain of memories of how it had all started 8 years ago. Our first serious crime with Jade happened right within the walls of our own school, immediately after classes ended. Jade had been able to deceive the old janitor, Chuck, with amazing theatricality, assuring him that she had accidentally left her textbook in the fourth floor math classroom. While she was busy inside, I obediently stood guard in the empty hallway, not even realizing what a dirty game I was being dragged into. Jade moved lightning fast. She pulled out the bottom drawer of our teacher, Mr. Riordan's desk, and confidently extracted fresh copies of the pop quizzes for tomorrow's final exam. When she showed me the loot, I flatly refused to participate in this cheating. Turning toward the exit, I felt that familiar sticky terror again. Standing at the end of the dark school hallway was that same little blonde girl in the pink dress, silently watching us with her gaze as we fled down the stairs. Jade had no intention of stopping at my refusal. Exactly at midnight, she secretly brought a heavy ladder to my house, propped it against my second-story window, and knocked insistently on the glass. Before I could even scream from surprise, she shoved a completed test sheet into the room, with the correct answers already neatly filled in. The moment her silhouette disappeared into the darkness of the yard, I didn't hesitate for a second. I crumpled the paper and hurled it to the very bottom of the trash can. But escaping the catastrophe was impossible. The next morning, as soon as class began, Mr. Riordan announced to the entire room with a grim face that exactly one strict accountability form had vanished from his office. After the final bell, he ordered Jade and me to remain in our seats. The teacher coldly informed us that the old janitor, Chuck, had already identified our faces from the photos in the fresh yearbook. Riordan promised to hand this matter over to the principal the very next morning, which for me meant an instant, disgraceful expulsion and the complete collapse of my future medical career. And that was when events reached their bloody climax. Without saying a word, Jade forced me into her car and brought me to Mr. Riordan's small, isolated house. The front door turned out to be unlocked. We walked into the kitchen unhindered, and at the sight of what lay there, the air caught in my throat. Our math teacher had been brutally beaten. Dark, clotted blood covered his head. One eye was completely swollen shut with a massive hematoma, and he himself was bound tightly with layers of gray duct tape to a heavy wooden chair. His mouth was also sealed shut with tape, from beneath which came only a muffled, helpless groaning. Jade turned to me with an absolutely insane look and calmly announced that we couldn't just let him go. The only way to avoid expulsion was to kill him, staging it as a simple home robbery. A wild, primal horror seized me. I categorically refused to take part in this and took a step back, intending to run out into the street. But Jade instantly blocked my exit. She stepped right up to me, leaned in close to my ear, and delivered my ultimate secret in a quiet, poisonous whisper. She said she knew all about that little blonde girl I kept seeing around. Jade made it crystal clear to me. No one in the world saw that child except me alone, which meant I was far more crazy and dangerous than she was. And if I tried to leave right now, she would make sure absolutely everyone found out about my madness. In that very same second, my mind completely betrayed me. I turned around and saw with horror that the same little girl in pink was indeed standing right in the middle of Mr. Riordan's bloodied kitchen. The child looked at me with her massive blue eyes and in that same pure, thin voice clearly commanded me to take the knife and finish the teacher. Jade, noticing my frozen gaze, grabbed a heavy carving knife with a long, bloodied blade from the kitchen table with a confident smile and forcefully thrust its handle straight into my trembling fingers.